All right, welcome back to the Not a Podcast show. It's a live stream. I'm your host, Sean Ongley, and it's been a few months since I've done this, and I'm happy to be back. Today's guest is Theresa Mitchell, somebody that I knew you could call volunteer level colleague at KBOO Community Radio back in my Portland days. Time keeps flying. I'm living in Philadelphia now, and it's been that way for a long time. Here I am in my middle bedroom in the home that I own, a home that I could never afford in Philadelphia, or excuse me, in Portland. And it's not lavish. It's not a great neighborhood. It's just, but it's fine. It's a fine neighborhood. If any of your neighbors are watching, I'm happy to be here. But so much has changed in Portland. So much has changed about me. But I don't know too much about Theresa and what's going on with her. And I just reached out last week to do a show so I get back into this live stream, and boom, first person in a while to just make it simple. And then I went ahead and made it real complex here up to the last minute with my mixer, which is embarrassing. Oh well, I'm rusty. I got to get back into the swing of this. So let's bring Theresa on to help me get back in the swing. How's it going, Theresa Mitchell?
Hi, Sean. It's going good. It's good to see you. It's been a minute.
Many minutes. I can tell you exactly what minute I believe last time I physically saw you.
Oh, yeah? When was that?
Were you emceeing for Jill Stein?
I was, yes.
Yeah, I saw you there.
And Jill Stein was sick. So my job was to come out and tell everyone that they weren't going to get to see Jill Stein.
Right, right. I think your joke was, but she has a good doctor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was the first year I ever voted Green Party, and the last. But yeah, I always wanted to. But I always got hooked into that. You have to vote the Democrat. You got to. They might lose.
Well, they apply a great deal of leverage, don't they, with the two-party system? And so I go back and forth myself. And I remember that moment with the Green Party. We were terrified that she had been poisoned or something. She was terribly sick.
Okay.
We didn't know if she was going to be able to continue to run.
Huh.
Last time I was in Philadelphia was 2016 for the convention. As a matter of fact, the only time I've been in Philadelphia. And
Are you there protesting or
no, I actually took a camera and a mic, not camera, took a microphone, and I sent audio back to KBOO of the covering the protests, covering the outside action. And I think I stayed in a house that was about the same era of yours, if I'm judging correctly from the door frame that I see behind you.
Yeah, there's a lot of homes were built in the 1930s because there was a housing crisis. There was too many people housed. That was the problem back then. Too many people crammed into quarters, so they rapidly built.
Well, good
And
on you for getting a house. And you're right, it's much more expensive, absurdly expensive here in Portland. And I would not have a house if I had not sort of just almost scammed my way into the house, scammed my way through a scam back during the what was the name of it? What was the popular name for the subprime lending crisis? That's what they called it. And I got a loan that was supposed to collapse, and I managed to just sort of jigger it so that it did not collapse. And so I still have a house.
interesting. There was a renegotiate something under Obama. I know somebody who it was some kind of being able to like renegotiate your mortgage deal. But you had to really go through hoops to get it. You're not talking about that. I can't remember the name of that. It's been a long time.
Well, the first thing I did was I was able uh, to get a new mortgage, and then I filed bankruptcy. The balloon note was not what they called a secured note, and so the judge stripped off the balloon note, and that's what saved my butt. That stripped away, let's see, more than $40,000,
Hmm.
and reset the loan so that I was only paying the major portion of the loan. As you may recall, part of those subprime loans is they would sell you two notes. One a regular mortgage, more or less regular mortgage, and the other one, pardon me, would be a balloon note. So that's how it happened.
I see. Yeah, I just did the old FHA, and it's kind of a bad deal because you pay the mortgage insurance. Not that's different from the homeowner's insurance,
Right? Yes.
but it's kind of just throwing money out the window in a lot of
Right.
ways.
I was able to finally get out from under the mortgage insurance as well. And if it
Yeah,
weren't for all of that, dodging and shifting around, I would not be able to pay the mortgage.
yeah, and it can be tricky being a homeowner, but it's sometimes it's kind of trickier being a renter unless you have a lot of protection.
Well, it's a
It,
worse deal, isn't it?
it generally is.
'Cause you never get any equity.
Um, yeah, we could come. Maybe we'll circle back to that topic, but I want to introduce people to you. Teresa, where did you come from? Where are you from? Are you from Oregon?
I am not from Oregon. I was born in Texas, and I like to say I escaped there about 33 years ago. And I had started a news program at KAZI, which was almost entirely black radio, except I think for me and for Tomas Ibarra, who had a program on Sundays. And so I started doing a program I called Press Watch on Sundays on his show, which is called his name is Tomaso, it's called the Toe Jam. And
Mm.
I
What city is that?
KAZI,
Yeah.
that's in Austin. That's all black radio in
Okay.
Austin, Texas. And hello, KAZI. I haven't thought about them for a minute. And then I brought the show up to KBOO and brought it into Kathleen Stevenson. And at first I said, and she was the membership director, I think it was. But I brought it to her and I said, I need studio space. And she said, okay. And then after a while I said, well, I've got this program. Would you like to try to run it? And ran it for 30 years on KBOO. And, quite
Okay.
enjoyed doing it. Learned a lot doing that.
So about 1990 to 2020.
That's right. That's about right.
Wow. I got there in 2006
Right.
and was bounced around 2011 or so.
Well, KBO is still there, KBOO, and
Okay. Is the one in Austin? It's probably still there too.
the one in Austin is still there. Yes.
I'm sure it's doing good now. I mean, radio's tough, but there's Austin's blown up since then, kind of like Portland.
I'm told that it is nothing like what it was when I left there in 1990.
Caboose, they all go through change. Everything goes through change, and that's okay. Sometimes it goes in really the wrong way. So I don't know what you mean necessarily, but
Well,
and wrong can be, right for the other person. So who
okay.
knows?
I really don't know what it's like in Austin. I haven't been there in all these years.
You haven't been back?
Not at all.
Mm. Bad relationship with family, not good.
My family was in a different town, but a bad relationship with Texas would be more like it. And as a transgender woman, I certainly would be more than unwelcome there at this time. As a matter of fact, I would be able to pass through the airport in Texas.
I don't agree. I think especially in a place like Austin. Austin definitely is a different place now, don't you?
That's not racist, sure.
I haven't been there since 2012, but it was like Portlandy, you know what I mean?
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's how it was when I left.
How was it when you left?
It was, as you say, Portland E. It was an island.
Yeah, the oasis of Texas for the lefties and for the weirdos.
Right. It was okay to be an intellectual, or as close as you could get to that. It was okay to care about knowledge and truth.
Yeah. I wish that I would love to have spent more time in Austin when it wasn't South by Southwest. But still, I got to hang out with locals and local comedians mostly, and it was I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the place. So I've always wanted to go hang out back, but I don't know, can never travel. It's hard to travel. Find a time to travel. But so you've been in Portland all this time, and you're a homeowner there, so you're probably going to stick around there, huh?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've retired now, and so I have my health insurance through an Oregon company, and my pension, of course, is paid through TriMet. I used to drive for TriMet, the bus service in Portland.
Oh, that's right.
So I have economic ties here that would be difficult to supersede, and I feel very lucky to have them. I'm lucky to have a pension. I'm lucky to have Social Security. Um, because I'm 64, I'm not eligible for Social Security yet, or at least not full Social Security. So I was able to get disability, and with the health care, I'm able to get by,
Okay.
which is unusual.
Yeah, maybe you can do some value-based content where people can send you, contributions.
Oh, I could try that. Haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I usually talk about that's I'm supposed to do that at the intro. Be like, yo, go to my website. There's a tab there, value for value. Go give me some money because everything I do is free.
Right.
But so I just did it 11 minutes into the show. Yeah. So, you can always do that. I really believe it's hard. I mean, selling ads is hard. Getting enough traffic to sell ads is hard. I would think that if you can get that kind of traffic, then you can get people to give you money. But at the same time, I don't want to put up a paywall. I just want to put it out there. But
Right. Well, it's a whole enterprise, and I know nothing about it. I know that with any medium that you have to pay in to get value out, and so I suppose that if I wanted to put my face out there, that I would make some effort to pay to put my face or uh, my idea out on various networks, frames, whatever you call them.
yeah,
I'm that far behind the times, and then hopefully it would work, and I would put out the content and make it that way. But
now you're doing a live stream show with Ani, who
yes,
is the volunteer
used to
director
volunteer coordinator.
was coordinator. That's right. I was trying to find the word at KBOO.
Right.
So how long have you been doing that?
We've been doing that a couple of years now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing that during the pandemic.
Okay.
So
There you go. I just learned about it from you the other day. I mean, that goes to show how much content there is.
Say the name and the time.
What is that her back there?
you might say the name and the time. Well, okay. It's called This Is Now Bridge to a Better World, and it runs on Fridays at 9 a.m. Pacific.
On YouTube.
On YouTube. And you can get it on multiple platforms at once, streamed multiple at once. That's what this app is for,
Right.
so that I can distribute it. But there's several other options out there. So, were you from a more conservative household, or were your parents more into that?
My folks are still alive, and they're very different than they were when I was little. So when I talk about them in terms of conservative or not conservative, I have to be specific about what era I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1960s and 1970s, they were quite conservative. They were white evangelicals, and they are pretty much what you would expect. We're pretty much what you would expect in that time and place in San Antonio, Texas, for example, in the 60s and 70s. So they were not able to comprehend, for example, what a transsexual or a transgender person, see that I use the old word there, what a transgender person might be. And I had never heard of one.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I was a girl and would occasionally say so and incur their wrath thereby. But no one knew what that was about.
Yeah. So so you felt that way as a kid, and it never let go?
Yes. Well, if we're going to talk about that, then I probably should say a distinction that I was just talking about with my partner yesterday about this. I am transgender, but I am also double sexed. I have uterine tissue, and I had a ovotestis removed in 1971, and that's because of a drug called diethylstilbestrol that was quite a profit maker for Libby Pharmaceuticals and a couple of other pharmaceutical companies in the 50s. This is something that's been suppressed actively by Libby and by foundations that have been set up for that purpose over the
I
years.
have never heard of this. But,
There's a reason you've never heard of it. So yes, I am transgender, and I want to make the distinction that I'm not trying to say that I am any way more pure than someone who is transgender without any visible or detectable intersexed traits. But I am saying, because I want to stand up for intersex people, and because we are so very invisible, I want to say, yes, I am intersexed, and I actually exist, and I'm here.
Yeah, that doesn't come up in the conversation a lot these days. Yeah, the whole discussion on this issue can get just extremes, and so like I don't know.
It's a moneymaker now for the richer aspects of the crazier aspects of the Republican Party, and it's been heavily politicized.
I mean, when it becomes politicized, it becomes a moneymaker for both parties. That's the problem with the two-party system, right? So one's fundraising against, one's fundraising for.
That's true.
And that way, I can never tell what's the grift. Generally, I just assume anything coming out of either party's policies has a grift, and not really that much heart involved. They have to slip in something for the people. Otherwise, because you need the consent of the people to be governed.
Do you?
But,
I don't think. Technically, you do. And
technically, they try to ride that. They always ride the line right up to the edge.
Yes, you'd better make it look like you do. But I don't think that's what we're experiencing in the United States. I think we're experiencing very effective and very advanced mind control.
Yeah, it's mind control.
Yeah.
And mind control is like double thought. There's a lot of angles to mind control.
Sure.
But just like being fed contradictory information and contradictory, just leave it at that, information all the time is a mind fuck, and it definitely just makes you exhausted and collapse to one side or the other, or just become confused and acquiescent. It's just a very effective way to just be getting us constantly spinning around between arguments.
It disempowers. Yes, I agree.
And the divide and conquer thing is real. And I don't feel like I'm on any sides anymore. There's a lot of, since the pandemic, I was opposed to mandating the vaccine. There's a handful of lefties that feel that way still, and a lot of Democrat mainstreamers definitely wanted to mandate it. And I don't know where you stand on that issue, but because I stood on that side of the issue, not wanting the vaccine, not wanting to force others to get it, I ended up, finding myself aligned more with people that are right wing, and I'm going, well, shit. Okay. So now I'm just like, okay, sometimes I agree here, sometimes I agree there, but my principles haven't really changed in my life. Any kind of forced medical, I would never have been for that. That includes the right to choose. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Well, it's a tricky business, isn't it? I mean, I think ideally, when a pandemic happens, we have a competent system in place to suppress the pandemic rather than suppress the people. And what I would think would be ideal would be to present the vaccine in a way in which everyone would want it, and that it would be good enough that everyone would see that they wanted it.
That it's good enough. That's
right, and that it would be effective against the virus. And so what we had instead was, again, a very politicized system, and it was Trump who politicized it, because Trump only thinks of his own power, and at first wanted to deny that the pandemic was happening at all. And you remember all the things that he did. I don't need to go with that again. but his incompetence and his denial certainly allowed literally boatloads of people to come into the United States infected. Plane loads, certainly, from China, which is one of the first things that I railed about when the pandemic was first starting up. And I was still broadcasting on KBOO, I said, how can they possibly be allowing people to come in to the United States without any screening at all, simply because they're U.S. citizens? I mean, the fact that they were U.S. citizens did not save them from being infected. And of course, they did bring it in. And there are 1 million dead. And it's a sad part of our history now.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of points to all that I see a little differently. I didn't feel great about his leadership at any time. I never did. I don't feel good about the Democratic Party's leadership at this time either. I do remember Pelosi specifically when he did ban flights from China. Pelosi called it racist, and then she herself banned flights from China recently or something. Yeah.
Pelosi's a contradictory piece of work. And
Yeah.
if you ask me, it's because her job is to stand up without exception for the rights and privileges of corporations.
Yeah. Oh, she's a piece of work. It's amazing. The Democratic Party, I don't know when it ever really was. I don't know if it ever really was truly any of these parties, if any ever really been. There's always some good people, but party itself. And so,
well, you're talking to a revolutionary anarcho-socialist. So the first thing I'm going to say is that, of course, you can't have. Of course, the parties are corrupt because you have one capitalist version that's more right-wing, and you have a capitalist version that's slightly to the left of that, and you have what you call the Democrat ratchet, in which right-wing policies are enacted and then kept in place by the subsequent Democrat administration. So we slide further and further to the right in every aspect that I can think of, except pandemics. I mean, the Democrats do act differently when it comes to pandemics, but they don't acknowledge the underlying situation, the fact of capitalism. They don't easily, for example, they didn't want to make the vaccine free, which is the only way to get everyone. If everyone had agreed to take it, that was the only way to get everyone to take it. There were various, economic barriers in the way, and the Democrats have always been fine with that. They've always been part of that whole idea that if you ain't rich, then who cares about you?
So either way, whether it's I think making the vaccine free is actually a better guarantee for a major corporation like Pfizer. Now, how do you feel about this idea of like cozying up and trusting a company who's so clearly not trustworthy? Like what motivation do they have to present something safe and effective rather than just whatever, plus there's other things to it, but like,
well, let's look at what actually happened. There was a tremendous and emergency vaccine development that happened with American taxpayer support in a huge way by billions of dollars. And that was done by these corporations, but it was also very much a handout to the corporations. And so they had every incentive to produce a safe and effective vaccine. And I think given the time constraints, they got pretty close, not extremely close, but they developed vaccines that have somewhere between 60 and 80, I think is it 80% efficiency. And they were harsh vaccines. I don't know if you took them. I didn't know. They were very hard on me, but I suspect that without the vaccines, when I got COVID, it would have been harder. And I did get COVID. Did you get COVID?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, it was nasty. And it knocked my partner into the hospital several times. So
yeah, I never got sick during that whole phase. Like I've had some little things more recently, but during those first 2 years, I never got sick. I basically didn't get sick at all. I did have a tenant housemate that was, and we suspect that he did catch it because he was an Uber driver in Philadelphia, driving people to the airport every day. And before anybody knew about it, before China was even willing to talk about it, it was already in the country. So my opinion on it is that there was actually never a time frame outside of China recognizing it, the leak, Wuhan recognizing the leak, and they suppressed it first. And there's I don't remember the author. I listened to her on a podcast. She discussed it. Basically, her conclusion is that there was never a time outside of the first like couple weeks or something in Wuhan that it was released from the lab. And you might not agree there's a lab thing, but
I'm not sure I understand you. You're saying there was never a time in which.
it could have been prevented from spreading around the world.
That's a good point. Yes, I think, once it got out into a major population in the jet age, what can be done? It would have required an immediate shutdown.
Exactly, and it could have been done only in Wuhan, but the lab probably had incentive not to talk about it, and China had an incentive not to talk about it. So when China finally came forth, my tenant had already brought a pretty bad respiratory illness, and he, like I said, he was just driving back and forth from the airport with strangers, and he specifically remembered one sneeze on him that like really alarmed him, and then he got sick right after it. So
that would be alarming inside a cab. Well,
yeah.
These illnesses are very different in general when you're in your mid 60s. So I feel lucky to have survived it at this point.
Well, yeah, good. So yeah, it's so many, like, I knew from the beginning, like, it was going to take years before we really understand everything, from how it happened to how we could have done it better to the vaccine. All this stuff, the real science takes years and years for all this stuff to be understood. So when it came to trust the science, it was more like, okay, I'm 50-50 on all that. What if I just throw the balance on, I don't trust the government or Pfizer, and I'm just gonna try to abstain from all this business as much as I can. So I deeply oppose anybody telling me what I had to do. And that is a traditional left wing position, a similar position, left wing position that's changing, but I still hold, is speech. Any as little as possible do I want any bar to the communication system. And then third is, war. I mean, I was activated. The first thing that ever really activated me was against the war in Iraq and going to Iraq. And now I see that the left wingers, at least the Democrats.
So given your age, you're talking about the 2003 invasion.
Yeah.
Where's the lesser? Okay.
So, right. I'm 40. So yeah, that's when I was 18, 19. I was 18 on 9/11. And so I guess I was turning 20 when we went into Iraq. And I was fully opposed to it. Went to a lot of protests, and it made me almost more like anarchist in my mind. But then I kept voting Democrat, unfortunately. And
there are plenty of anarchists who end up voting Democrat or taking some more or less practical measure under the circumstances. And I think it's debatable whether that should be done. And I think it's an interesting question. Speaking of left viewpoints, what to do in case you feel absolutely violated by a vaccine or you don't trust it. It's also a socialist view or an anarchist view that you would want to consider well, apparently it's hailing here, that you would want to consider what effects your actions or inactions would be on the society. So could you, what actions would you take if you thought you might become infected to prevent spreading it?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess the same thing as I always did. If like I felt like I was contagious with something, or just generally sneeze into my arm, I was always like that, like not.
Would you isolate?
Keeping distance. I mean, yeah, sure. If I'm sick, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to stay home till you get better.
Right. I mean, I asked
And the
because
problem is, like, workers don't always have that option,
that's true.
lest they sacrifice themselves. And I mean, to me, the response with all this, if we have a genuine pandemic here, the public policy to me only made sense to give everybody sick days until it's over. Like, we're just going to fund sick days.
Absolutely.
We're going to fund the hospitals. So any hospital that, like, we had a hospital in the city that closed just a few months before all this went down.
Oh, I think I remember that.
Hahnemann Hospital.
Well, when you say a real pandemic, I suppose you mean one that's even worse than one that kills a million of us, like maybe the H5N1.
I said if, just
Yeah.
saying, if this is a legit pandemic, and talking about 2 years, 3 years ago at the beginning, I'm going, why are we not paying sick days instead of forcing everybody home? Why are we not just funding sick days? These kinds of things made a lot more sense to me if there's a different agenda going on. Like, the response they took only makes sense if there's a different grifty
Right. And the
agenda,
agenda, yes, and I agree that the agenda is, keep profits flowing to the super rich.
which is like pump money, print money. It's like,
No,
I mean,
I'm talking about keeping the employees working no matter what, keeping the employees working even if they're dropping dead.
well, but again, like, you can keep them working, going to the office if you give them sick days. Well, the office, they tend to already have sick days. It's the people going to McDonald's to work. It's the people going to McDonald's. Shit, you have sick days. It's the people really in, like, small local businesses, from employers that can't afford sick days. I know Portland passed the mandatory sick day policy, but we don't have that here.
Well, I have to agree about sick days, and I've noticed.
And that's just one tiny point I'm getting hung up on for a little bit too
Right.
long. But
Well, I think it's a good point. I mean, I worked for a union job, so I had sick days, but I noticed that everyone else was getting squeezed harder and harder over the decades that I worked, and it's kind of disgusting if I look at it with that longer, being older and looking back at what things used to be. They've gotten so much worse. I didn't think they were that great in 1990, and now workers are just absolutely squeezed for every last drop of blood.
totally, in every way. In every way. So, like, then paying for healthcare it's just, why are we not just giving healthcare to everybody? Like, it's just these, we could have you can treat this thing, but the unwillingness to give people access to treatment was unbelievable to me. It's like the only solution was going to be lockdowns and vaccines, and that to me was crazy. And again, this is just one topic among many that I've watched the left and the right diverge, and the extreme left and right kind of come to meet each other around the back, like, when it came to some of these things that I still remain as my position.
When I was in
Now,
Cuba,
a lot of right wingers don't want to see any form of, like, my taxes paying for your healthcare sort of situation. I don't know what the best thing is, really, because I don't like the government having every angle control over everything.
why would you? But right, I'd like to ask some right wingers. Well, you already pay to subsidize Exxon.
Yeah,
How about diverting some of that money?
there's a lot of libertarians that don't like that either. They don't
Well, they
want,
shouldn't. I mean, but
yeah,
it's not in their awareness at this point. I mean, our political discussions, our political frames are rather confined. I was
yes,
going to say that when I was in Cuba, I mentioned at some point I had the runs. If you, we made the joke that if you get the diarrhea in the socialist country, you have the Trotsky, haha. But to get treatment for it,
I get it.
we got some antibiotic, and there was talk of. I brought up payment, and they were just so offended. It's like, why would you charge money? It'd be like, why would you charge a starving man in the desert for water? It's an offensive thing to them, and it's an offensive thing to Europeans, from what I hear from people around the world who find out just how much money that Americans have to pay, or that they run into bills that they are absolutely unable to pay for
Yeah.
healthcare.
It is a problem. And I just don't take the sides that are standard anymore. I just don't take the left wing side anymore. I certainly I'm skeptical of right-wing sides angles. So I'm always these days I'm just free to approach everything, and it's interesting. This Ukraine thing is another thing that's bugging me about the left. And where do you feel? How do you feel about that? What do you like? The $100 billion has been. I mean, what do you think? Ukraine.
I think a lot of things. I think the situation is complex and that it's difficult to talk about it without making things worse. Before I say anything, I want to say that I don't agree with a country being invaded, and that if the Russians invaded here, I would certainly be happy to shoot at them. So I support the Ukrainians freeing their territory. That said, before it all started up, there was. Do you remember Victoria Nuland,
Mm-mm.
Secretary? Not
Familiar
Secretary.
name.
She was an ambassador, a career ambassador, in 2014 in Ukraine, who was notorious for manipulating the Ukrainian government and setting up, really imposing a government on the Ukrainians through the Maidan revolution, if you want to call it a revolution. And 2014 was when all
2014, yeah.
Yes,
I remember.
2014 was when all this stuff exploded, sometimes literally. And there's a lot to say about who the CIA paid and what they encouraged them to do. Are you familiar with the name Stepan Bandera?
No.
Stepan Bandera is a Ukrainian partisan who fought the Soviet occupation of Ukraine using Nazi funds and to some extent Nazi ideology. And so the CIA came in and said, well, if you support Stepan Bandera, and if you don't like Russians telling you what to do, then come along and join the Nazi party, and we'll give you arms, training, logistics. And this is what flipped out the Russians, and it was intended to flip out the Russians. Now, having said all this, I'm not going to make an excuse for the Russians collectively punishing the Ukrainians and torturing their, all the ugly things they have done. But I do support paying U.S. funds. I mean, as long as we're paying billions and billions of dollars to the U.S., to the Pentagon to, for example, try to provoke a war constantly with North Korea, some of those billions can pay for anti-tank rockets. I think that's moral.
Well, it's okay. So before you said that our discourse, I forget the words you used, but the public discussion the scope tends to be really limited, right?
True.
And I don't remember if it was a Chomsky thing, but it was something about how they set the table for us. Like the way that they get us to just argue about one side or another means that we end up choosing that either one is going to be one that they want, in a way. So it's like you get all hung up on winning against a different side, so you accept this like a highly compromised solution. I don't know if no, those words didn't make sense. It's basically, let me dial it back. The argument gets set in play without all the context, for example, with Ukraine that you just presented. You know so much more about the background and the context of what has happened there than most people. So you have a more nuanced opinion about it rather than just, send them tanks. And if you're an anti-war traditional lefty like me, then you probably don't want to see war there. You'd much rather see a peaceful solution, wouldn't you?
I would, and the most immediate peaceful solution would be for the Russians to stop.
Yeah, but then that's only going to happen with a deal. There's got to be a compromise. It's
No, that's true. I agree.
Yeah.
And also, I think that there are sharp limits to it. And I think it is morally fraught for me to say, send them anti-tank rockets, because it goes a lot further than that, doesn't it? And it's being sold as this glorious little war where we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And that isn't exactly how it works. And you remember protesting against the Iraq war when we were doing things like when we bombed the Al Amaria bombing shelter, the the bomb shelter for all the women and children in Baghdad who went into that underground bomb shelter by the hundreds. The U.S. deliberately blew off the top of that shelter and sent in a bomb so intense that it melted them. It melted hundreds of people to death. We did that sort of thing constantly to Iraq, and now we say, "Oh, we're the good guys." I don't think so. I mean, it's not.
We've lost all credibility, and that's why it seems that Europe is distancing. The world seems to be distancing itself from us now, from this United States policies. It's getting to be a problem. And the fact that you added, okay, I'm going to choose immigration as another example of like how covert operations, if you remember 2014, it stunk to high heaven. Obviously, that was a synthetic, or at least a covertly fueled protest movement in Kyiv, and it led to, what a convenient solution. It was a pro-US, pro-West government. Oh yeah, okay, then that stuck to heaven is something. So like it's not okay. So when it comes to immigration, I'm not opposed to these people that want to be here. I'm not opposed to these people, but I also don't think that we should just keep letting it happen forever and ever. But it doesn't mean that I think we should go and lock them up and punish them and police them. So it's like that kind of nuanced thinking. Nobody has it. It's always like, oh, we got to lock up the border, but nobody talks about like, okay, what about if we didn't have covert operations destroying elections, manipulating economies and all over South America? What if we didn't do that? Then maybe they wouldn't be flooding the border. Maybe their countries would be stable and they'd be happy, because usually they want to stay where they are.
That said, I agree with what you just said.
Yeah, it pisses me off that nobody talks about this.
Well, and that's part of this mythology that we're the good guys, despite the fact that we paid for the guerrillas rather than the guerrillas, and we paid for the contras, and called them the moral equivalent of the founding fathers, which might have been true in some quirky ways than they wanted to admit. But we caused that ugly situation. We utterly destabilized those countries on purpose, and now people are coming up here. But they're also coming up here because of climate change. It wouldn't be nearly as bad if we hadn't messed up their countries. And I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the table is set for us. It is so narrow. There is so little to discuss on these polarized issues. But I would argue that despite the bad reasons for people coming north, we should be welcoming a great number, millions of people, because we need people. I don't want to sound racist, but I mean, traditionally people worked in the fields, and now that's a big crisis. We don't have people working in the fields, but we need people to work generally.
I'll push on that, because I think you recognize your own, like, that's wrong. You know it in your heart, because that we want them to work in these mass corporate farms. We don't want them working in mass corporate farms, because the laws have been designed over the last 60 years to destroy small family developed farms, small farms. And
it's also because the United States, the heavies in the United States started things off with slavery, and that is a paradigm that has been set. And there's always been an attempt to get that super cheap or free labor in the fields, especially. And so when it was not possible to force Black people to work the fields, then suddenly people came up from south of the border to work the fields in only slightly better, or maybe sometimes worse conditions. Because
it's a long history that's never really detached fully from. I agree. The idea that people working on any kind of farm or plantation should somehow be making anything less than a living wage, and that's acceptable, that we want immigrants to do that so that we can eat at restaurants. It's just like, it's despicable to me that there's so many people think like that's okay. We actually just need to have a decent wage for everybody that's working, and not be destroying other countries to make other people come here.
Yeah.
And I think that if we weren't so divided in the arguments, we could actually agree on a lot more. I think if the scope of the arguments weren't so manufactured, but then I also can't think of a time in history where it wasn't like that. where people weren't deeply manipulated and controlled.
I suppose there are worse times and there are better times. I mean, and it depends on the frame there too. When it comes to who's working in the fields, uh, things are pretty bad now. When it comes to who's working in the factories, uh, things are worse now than they were in the 1970s. When it comes to who's working in the factories, things were better in the 60s.
Yeah, they made like much better wages.
Living wages.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, American workers in factories are still making more than most workers in other factories around the world. But even here, they're not making enough. I can't be everybody, but probably most.
I was noticing, I was watching a John Oliver program, and I was thinking to myself, he was taking on this topic, and I was thinking, who do we call a farmer? Do we call the person who goes out and plants the field, plows the field, picks the crop, puts it in the truck? Do we call that person a farmer?
Call them.
No, we call them farm workers.
Yeah, farm workers.
Who do we call the farmer? We call the farmer now the person who profits from all that, the person who arranges it financially and directs the workers. Well, there's a person who's involved at the farm, but it's more of a manager. But I'm just saying that we have ideological roadblocks set up to keep us from thinking through things clearly. As a commie, a little c commie, I say if there are 100 people working a farm, then whatever profits are made from that farm should be distributed to 100 people in something that they would agree to, in whatever shares that they would think was rational, rather than 99% of it going to one person.
Yeah. It's completely. I mean, it's really broken. So many things are broken. It's just something that's far too centralized, food production today. And that is something I find interesting. When I moved to Portland, I noticed that so many people had gardens and people had chickens in their yard. I'd never seen this before. And now it seems like this is what like more kind of conservative leaning libertarian types are into now. Whereas I don't know, in Portland, are people still growing chickens and gardens as much as they used to?
Just up the street for some goats that I heard as I was parking the van near my friend's place.
Yeah.
And it's a hobby thing.
Yeah.
They're not producing.
I just wonder if Portlanders are still like that, or if just the attitudes are changing and people are kind of like the libertarians, the younger libertarians that I guess at least the ones that I vibe with, are kind of more like the liberals from 20 years ago to me. Like, except for sometimes they have opinions about groups of people that I don't like. Especially transgender folks. This is where the transgender folks, the argument is really sensitive. I think it's happening mostly because of the fact of children. Like, if it was just like only about adults, I think a lot of people wouldn't give a shit about the argument very much. But
So
because it's so much about
hurting children, do you think I hurt children?
No, do I think you hurt children? No, I don't think you do.
A small group of very wealthy activists. They got money, for example, from Charles Koch, previously David and Charles Koch, and these are severely religious people who decided that since they had lost the ideological war against gay people, they were going to dial down on transgender people and develop as much rage as they possibly could. And they set up straw men. And, since you brought this up, I want to.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
I do want to say that the idea that children are being force-fed hormones is simply false. It's not happening. There are children who, after a scientific and medical assay, can be given anti-hormones, things that delay their hormones so they can make a choice later in life. There are schools in which children who are, and I do want to say children playing sports, there are a very few transgender children who play in more or less competitive sports. but it is not a statistically significant phenomenon. And
Like
there's
so many things, you take one or two examples and like you put it in, you make it viral, you get it on, you pump it up on social media,
and play the
and then
video.
suddenly it looks like the whole world is nothing but transitioning men beating up women and MMA fights and stuff like that.
Yes, and there are other just complete mythologies out there, like J.K. Rowling's idea that haha, I used a slur, that transgender people are raping women in bathrooms. Uh, these, I mean, there are a lot of people who come to downtown Portland. My housemate was telling me this because she works in a shop downtown, who come into her shop and say, "Well, I'm so glad that you've made it." And she says, I mean, she knows what they're saying, but she'll say, "Made it through what?" They say, "Made it through all the fires and the smashing of glass." And they just think that they're going to go into a war zone because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what is presented. Portland is nothing like that. Portland is pretty much the way you left it.
And the same thing about Philly. Like people act like there's this everyone's just junked out, or there's this shootings happening everywhere. Um, in Philly, if you mind your business, you're not gonna get shot.
I tell
And
you, tell you a
and
story about Philadelphia when I was there. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
that's
Go ahead.
okay. But that's just, I think like that's a lot of things I just don't get all bent out of shape about issues I don't understand yet if it's not in my business. The issue about transgender issues, they don't really relate to me. I don't have kids in school, so I'm not confronted with what are they talking about in the class. I'm fully straight. There's just, it's just, I mean, I have friends that, going back to KBOO, I think that's the first time I really spent time with anybody that, uh, outside of cisgender, identity. But I hang out at dance clubs. My friends today are all over the map when it comes to that. So it's like, it's just not a problem for me who somebody is. And in terms of me deciding on what things should be, it's not really my business.
Well,
On
there's going to be a transgender mass shooter out there. There is. There's going to be a transgender rapist out there, and they are approximately in proportion to any other population. And it's like you say, if you focus the camera down on that and repeat it, then you can produce what we see now, which is a very politicized situation about transgender people. I mean, if we were rational about transgender people at this point, when it comes to kids participating in school sports, we would simply be turning to the science. And there is something for the science to say about that. Uh, I'm not entirely on the side of saying, don't consider it at all. I don't. I'm not blind to that. And the fact is, I have a greater air capacity. What's the word? Lung capacity than most women, and that is because my body was full of testosterone until I was 43. How could it be otherwise?
right.
So why can't we just follow the science on that? But right now, it is simply being used to divide people and to stir up hatred. And if you think someone's being horrible, and if you think someone's a groomer, that's one of the worst things that you can imagine. I mean, it's just uh, many people. I personally have the experience of being molested by a pedophile, and it is just one of the foulest things you could possibly imagine doing to the kid. As a matter of fact, I think it probably is the foulest thing you could possibly imagine doing to a kid. It has
Yeah.
lifelong effects, and if you can smear a population and say, "Oh, they're groomers or they're likely to be groomers," well, you can make bank on getting people to come up and vote and rage and stomp around in the streets saying that they don't want that because, of course, they don't want that. But it's a
Yeah.
false.
You're like, oh, my public school kid is being groomed. I better pull him out, take him to Catholic school.
Well, yeah,
uh, like, yeah, no, it just, there's no real safe place. You have to be on top of whoever the hell's looking after your children, and whatever you agree with or don't agree with, you follow that. It's like if you can't have them in this classroom, you got to figure out what to do. But like, just yeah, I'm mostly bothered with just this. everybody's so hateful about these groups of people, one side or another. And I'm getting really frustrated with it, to be honest with you. Like, I can't look at my timeline anymore without being annoyed. Like, because there's people who I will totally get behind and agree with on some things, and then not others. And that's just how it is for me now. There's really almost nobody that I agree with all the time.
Well, that's probably good.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I feel smarter, although I feel dumber. I feel like I know less. I don't know. I just feel like I don't have as many answers as I used to, and that's more intelligent. But then I find myself maybe fumbling for opinions or about things too. Like,
Well, me too. I mean, you just heard me go all over the map about the Ukraine war. And it's like, sure, I'm against war, but send the anti-tank rockets. I mean, it's a screwed up situation. I'm not sure exactly what the right answer is, but I do want people to understand the breadth of the situation.
and we don't. It's not like we have to remember what position we hold in society. People act like their opinion should count on the same level as like everybody else or something. Like, there's just certain things you're an expert on and that you should really like probably invest more energy and time into being involved with. Like, if you want to be an activist, right? Like, what are you actually, and I'm not talking about you, I'm just saying if somebody wants to be an activist, a lot of people will just get emotional and then just grab onto every subject of the month. And then they take the side that's most comfortable socially for them. But I think you should be more about like, what are you specialized in? So that's for one thing why I ended up at KBOO. And I didn't really get involved with the politics. I kind of let go of politics a lot in my mind. I was one of these people that fell asleep during Obama and kind of just, I think we all just kind of got exhausted with Bush. And so, but by assisting KBOO, I felt like I was generally assisting something that I agreed with and doing exactly what I was good at, which was, or at least what I wanted to get better at, but was adept at, which was engineering.
Well, I really see KBOO and community radio as generally a good thing, and I do support it. It started bringing out the worst part of me just because of the infighting. The infighting got extremely ugly. Maybe some other time I could tell you the details, but I finally decided that for me it was time to have some distance.
Well, that is actually how I felt by the time I left. I was, yeah, we won't get into details about it, but I was just super busy and went broke, left town. I don't know. But it was also like, I didn't like the political environment within the place. And I feel like nonprofits are a sponge for that kind of stuff in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, I think we would agree though that generally it's good to strive for, it's good to make these efforts to find out and to inform others on a one-to-one basis. I was thinking about political polarization in the United States, and I thought one thing that would just make things better for everyone would be a better grasp of statistical analysis in general in the population. It surprises me to think how many people who have taken statistic classes in college who apparently don't grasp it at all, not even a little bit.
I never took one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think if people understood how few people are transgender, for example, they wouldn't get worked up about it.
Yeah. I tend to agree with that. It's all, but and then some people argue, well, for such a small percentage of the population, I think it feels to some people like we're changing everything about society for that. And
there are changes happening, and they're too rapid for some. But here again, it's like I feel like there's a general context that is not understood. For example, my dad is left-handed. When he was a kid, that was considered evil. No kidding.
like literally, yeah.
Considered evil.
Yeah.
And the number of people, if you look at graphs of the number of people who are identified or self-identified as southpaws, as left-handed. It was very low in 1910, and then by 1930, by the time my dad was born, it started raising. And what happened was people decided, and it just got around basically because of the arts and the humanities. People started to understand that the whole idea that left-handed people are evil was just a stupid idea. It had nothing, no scientific fact behind it whatsoever. So that by 1940 and 1950, the number of people identifying as left-handed soared. They were all over the place. Where'd they come from? Well, they were always there. It's the same with transgender. All these people who have been non-binary and who have been transgender all this time, who we always identified as people who are too girly or too manly. Now we have a different way of defining it, and people can come out of this box and say, well, now I can be counted. And people who would politicize it can look at that without the context and say, oh my God, there's a contagion. Everyone's transgender. Well, nothing's actually changed. It's just the way you perceive it that has changed.
I tend to agree. I'm always watching for the ways people are conditioned. So there is anytime there's trends, people can be conditioned. I don't like to use the word groomed loosely. I think I agree. That's like
that's a crime.
If you call someone a groomer, you really better be sure of what you're accusing them.
Well, yeah, I hate groomers. Who doesn't? I mean, I've
Yeah.
met a groomer. A groomer groomed me. I'd strangle him if he was still alive.
There you go. And it's so with this show, I really am trying to have, and I think this is like one of the harder things to do, is to have the whole range of people and arguments represented, not all at once. I don't really feel like doing debate shows. This seems like if I could get like I could have booked a libertarian. Libertarians always say yes, and they're very easy to like get on the show. It's harder to get left wingers and certain demographics. I've just found more difficult.
Well, good on you for getting an actual leftist. Me.
Yeah, and I've had, you aren't the first, and I still view myself as neither, but my values haven't really changed. I don't really view I think the whole idea of I'm left or right is just silly. I'm just trying to get over all the dualities and all the, in general, identification, ego. I just feel like I'd rather just kind of live and vibe and know who I am, and really without labels. And it's probably a lot of us would be happier that way. And then we're so prone to want to throw labels on people that we kind of feel like we almost absorb them defensively in a way, like to get ahead of it.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm coming to realize that a lot of political polarization right now has more to do with identity than information. For example, I understand now that a red hat is the approximate equivalent culturally of an AR-15. It's like you have a red hat, have an AR-15, then you're in a certain box, and you can bring up things with people who take that those cultural accoutrements, and you can say, oh well, you can say, well, President Trump isn't the president anymore, and a lot of them will say, yes, he is. The reason they do it is because they are so motivated to. What they're actually saying is, I'm over here. This is me over here with the red hat and the AR-15. I really don't care what you're saying. Don't confuse me with logic, because I'm on team red hat.
Yeah,
this is getting worse.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the red hats, the MAGAs. I like a lot of libertarians that I meet. They don't really like MAGAs either, and they're just concerned with basically an overly powerful government destroying the world. And as long as that's their main concern, I'm going to be generally on their side. And then I find myself also with a lot of lefties who have the same core principles. Do you still do you think Jimmy Dore is left wing? Do you think of him as a left winger anymore, or Glenn Greenwald?
Glenn Greenwald. Oh, okay. Now I don't know who Jimmy Dore is.
Jimmy Dore, no.
Glenn Greenwald. I remember that. I think that Glenn Greenwald is on team asshole.
You don't like him?
No.
Well, why? How'd you lose him? Why did you lose him?
Because his demeanor has become so foul and contentious.
Yeah, he's just kind of like hates the meat. He hates his colleagues.
And if he's not identified as a leftist, then good, because I don't want him representing me, because he's just
About
man. I don't want to.
like a Max Blumenthal or Aaron Mate.
I recognize the name Max Blumenthal,
Okay.
and Mate, I don't know.
It's interesting. These are the fringe people that were viewed as left before, but as things change, they're okay. I'm just curious. I wanted to throw some names out there and see where you identify.
Well, I would call Bernie Sanders moderate left.
Yeah,
Uh,
moderate left.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think he's all that scary.
No, he's very much a compromiser. I mean, especially since he ran. I mean, do you feel like he was given a fair shot, or do you think he was pushed out by the hill?
Oh, he was pushed out.
Yeah.
No, I think the Democrats were disgusting about that.
Yeah.
They
rigged the primary against him.
They really did.
Yeah.
So much for the name Democrat.
I kind of tend to think that, like, if they rigged the vote against Trump, I'm not surprised. I feel like these voting machines we have, Jill Stein was very much a voice on that, have been vulnerable and
That's
easy to manipulate.
Because the things that we leftists were yelling about that the Republicans were doing with debold machines for a span of a decade had now been weaponized in the form of a fantasy about Dominion machines. And the reason I say it's a fantasy is that it has been brought to court over and over. And we're about to find out, and mark my words on this, the fact that Dominion machines had actually overcome all of those errors. The fact that Dominion machines actually were clean is going to come out, and it's going to destroy Fox News. This is the end. By this time next year, there will be no Fox News.
Oh, I doubt that.
All right.
But that's fantasy. I know you'd love to see that, but I doubt it.
Would love.
There might not be a CNN. I tell you that, though. CNN's really struggling. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Dominion thing, because anytime you make something that like the centerpiece of the argument, that's probably the red herring. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Dominion machines are fine. But I do think that we've had pretty shady elections, pretty shady elections since 2000. I'd like to see that they're really good. I'm not sure that they are.
Far from democracy. I have to agree with that.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing to me, actually. But whatever. I mean, okay, that's why this episode's called Political Dysphoria. We're just reviewing the things that we're all generally dissatisfied with, that we generally feel uncomfortable with. There's just this disease, the basic dis-ease of the political body and the civilization at the moment.
Right, Andre, it's been interesting to hear where you're coming from on this.
Yeah, it's just, I think everybody has this feeling of political dysphoria, almost everybody right now. And that's really the problem, is that it's like nobody feels like they can really trust. I think there's people who are just full on MAGA and then just full on blue no matter who. But that's really not the majority. I feel like that's a club, like a cult.
Well, no, people want to make their rent or mortgage, and they want to get their groceries, and they want to try to get some reliable transportation if they need that. We're all kind of, I say we, I just said earlier that I'm a bit of an exception. I've gotten very lucky, but people are just crushed these days. And of course, when you're crushed, then you have to deal with what's right in front of you. I mean, you have to obtain housing and food, and maybe you just don't have time to do political analyses.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of us can squeeze in podcasts and stuff while we're working, and that's like good. That's actually pretty educational. A lot of people are getting content, but that's good.
I feel very lucky, and I intend to read more histories, and I intend to broaden my knowledge. And a lot of people just don't have that opportunity now, I think.
Me too. I feel the same way. So I'm glad that we found common ground today, and also some disagreements, but
Yeah, it
it's
was
no big
great talking,
deal.
to you, Sean.
Likewise.
It's fun.
I'll let you go. You don't have to. If anything you want to talk about, anything, you can stay on the side.
Well, I think I've had my say.
Okay, good. All right, then I'll let you go, and just have a good night. Thanks for coming on.
You too.
Okay, peace.
Bye-bye.
All right, there you go, Theresa Mitchell. And I feel good about that. I feel like that she joined again. She's back up. So that to me was basically what I'm trying to do with this show. I invite, there's an open invitation to anybody that wants to have a conversation to join the show. You don't have to have a big following. Sometimes I get people with tens of thousands of followers. Sometimes I get people with, like me, a few hundred. And I don't care. I don't care at all. And I don't care if we have the same opinions or completely different ones. I'd hate to see something blow up and become shitty and lame, but that could happen. Could get heated, but I'm not really one to do that. So just try to treat people that way, I guess, and stop falling for every psyop on Twitter. Stop drumming up all the division. If you really want to see things change, stop being part of the problem in that way. And whatever you think the problem is, I guess be true to that solution. That's my opinion about all of it. And I humbly say, until next time, thank you for joining us on the Not a Podcast show. I'll catch you when you catch you, hopefully soon. This is kind of like season 2. All right, that's all. Okay, bye-bye.